Charles Stanley's story begins in a quiet corner of Virginia during one of the hardest times in American history. Born on September 25, 1932, in Dry Fork, life didn't give him an easy start. His family was struggling, like many others during the Great Depression. People were out of work, food was scarce, and hope was something most could barely afford. But the real tragedy came just 9 months after Charles was born. His father died suddenly at only 29 years old. That single moment changed everything. It left his mother, Rebecca, alone to raise him in a world that already felt broken. Growing up without a father left a huge mark on Charles. He talked about it often, the constant feeling of something missing, a space in his heart that couldn't be filled. That absence shaped the way he thought about life, family, and especially about God. For Charles, the idea of a loving, always present father wasn't just comforting. It became the foundation of his faith. That spiritual idea would later shape the way he preached, the way he led, and the way millions of people connected with him. But life didn't get easier. When Charles was 9, his mother remarried, hoping to build a new life. Unfortunately, it turned out to be another painful chapter. Her new husband, John Hall, was an alcoholic who brought fear and violence into their home. Charles witnessed awful things. His stepfather hurting his mother, yelling, throwing things, and creating a constant sense of danger. There were nights Charles was so scared that he kept a loaded gun by his bed. That kind of fear sticks with a person. But instead of breaking under the pressure, Charles turned to the only place he ever felt safe, the church. The church became more than just a building to Charles. It was his shelter. His family had Pentecostal roots, and his grandfather was one of the founders of their local church. The singing, the sermons, the emotional prayers, they all became part of who he was. When things were the worst at home, Charles would sneak away to the church basement and cry out to God, sometimes for hours. It was raw and real. For him, prayer wasn't just tradition. It was survival. And even though Charles would later become a Baptist preacher, the passionate style of those Pentecostal days stayed with him. One conversation with his grandfather changed everything. At 17, unsure if he was really meant to become a pastor, Charles went to North Carolina to visit him. His grandfather didn't give a long speech. He just said one thing that stuck. If God tells you to put your head through a brick wall, you run for it. It's his job to make the hole. That idea became Charles's motto for life. Obey God, no matter what, and trust him with the results. Charles went on to study at the University of Richmond, and then later attended Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Texas. These were big years in American Christianity. Preachers were becoming national figures, and the church was becoming more visible in public life. Charles worked hard to learn everything he could, Bible studies, Greek, Hebrew, and especially how to preach in a way that people could actually understand. He didn't want to be just another voice behind a pulpit. He wanted to help people find answers in their everyday struggles. By the time he was 25, Charles was already pastoring a small church in North Carolina. He also taught preaching and evangelism to students at a nearby Bible school. The pay wasn't much, and the church was small. Just about 150 people. But Charles never complained. He loved being able to speak to farmers and factory workers, the kind of people who reminded him of his own roots. In 1958, Charles was ordained as a Baptist minister. He was only 26, and that was rare. Most pastors didn't reach that level so young. But Charles had a different kind of drive. He could already see how television and media were starting to shape the world, and he had a feeling the church needed to keep up. Soon, his ministry would be much bigger than he ever imagined. From 1959 to 1968, Charles moved through several churches in Ohio, Florida, and other places. Each move wasn't just a new job. It was a learning experience. In Miami, he saw his church grow during the tense days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In Bartow, Florida, he chose to take a position at a smaller church, even though he could have gone somewhere bigger. For Charles, the goal wasn't just numbers. It was about helping people grow spiritually and build real community. Then came 1969, the year everything changed. Charles joined First Baptist Church of Atlanta as an associate pastor. What he didn't know was that the church was divided and filled with conflict. People were arguing over theology, church leadership, and politics. It got so bad that Charles was physically attacked during one of the meetings. But instead of walking away, he stayed. He endured 2 years of tension, waiting for a chance to help the church heal. That chance came in 1971 when the congregation voted to make him the senior pastor. From that point on, things began to move quickly. In 1972, Charles started a TV program called The Chapel Hour. It aired on 2 local stations and reached around 16,000 people. His direct, practical preaching style stood out. By 1978, the Christian Broadcasting Network offered him a national platform. The program was renamed In Touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, and it wasn't long before it was being seen across the entire country. Charles didn't stop there. In 1982, he founded In Touch Ministries, a non-profit that helped expand his reach through radio, satellite, and digital media. By the early 1980s, his sermons were everywhere, on television sets in nearly every U.S. city, and eventually in more than 100 countries. He also cared deeply about education. Back in 1966, before all the fame, he had started a Christian school in Miami that focused on teaching kids about faith and life. That commitment to education never faded. By the 1990s, First Baptist Atlanta had grown from 5,000 to over 15,000 members. In 1997, Charles made a bold move, relocating the church to a bigger modern building in Dunwoody. The new campus could seat 3,000 people and matched his vision for where the church was going. One of the church's most loved programs was the Passion Play, a dramatic retelling of Jesus's last week. It ran for more than 30 years and became a huge part of the church's identity. But Charles wasn't just focused on big shows. He believed technology could be used for good. He launched something called the Messenger Lab, which created solar-powered audio players that could broadcast sermons and scripture in multiple languages. These devices reached people in places with no electricity or internet, even as far as Antarctica. At his peak, Charles's messages aired on over 4,000 stations in 127 languages. His voice, once limited to a tiny Virginia town, now circled the globe. But behind all the success, there was pain. While his public image was one of confidence and strength, his personal life was unraveling. His wife, Anna, felt increasingly alone. She eventually stopped going to his church, and their son, Andy, noticed the silence and distance growing at home. In 1993, Anna filed for divorce. For someone who had always promoted family values, this was a huge blow. The divorce wasn't finalized until 2000, and during those years, Charles faced heavy criticism. Some wanted him to step down, especially since he had once said he would resign if ever divorced. But he chose to stay, and that decision divided his church and staff. The divorce also strained his relationship with Andy, who would later become a well-known pastor himself. The tension between father and son became one more chapter in a life already filled with challenges. Still, Charles kept preaching. He kept building. His influence only grew. When he passed away in 2023, millions remembered him as a man of strong faith, powerful sermons, and unwavering commitment. But in the years that followed, his family began to speak more openly about his final days. It turned out the strong public figure had also been deeply human, flawed, searching, and emotional. One of the final things he said to Andy shifted their relationship. It was a moment of healing, after years of distance, that brought closure to both of them. Charles Stanley's story is one of hard-earned success and heartbreaking struggle. From the loss of his father as a baby to building a media empire that reached the world, he showed resilience at every turn. His motto, "Obey God and leave the consequences to Him," carried him through moments of violence, confusion, rejection, and fame. He changed the way churches used media. He built programs that touched lives. But he also lived with regret, with pain that didn't always make the headlines. His story reminds us that faith can be both a source of strength and a shield in life's hardest battles. But it also reminds us that public success often comes with a personal cost. Charles Stanley was more than a preacher. He was a man shaped by tragedy, driven by calling, and remembered for both his achievements and the wounds he never completely healed. If you found this story moving or thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.